Introducing the Speak and Solve initiative, an arena where reason, logic, and empathy converge to shed light on pressing concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. This is the 7th edition of the SASI debate, proudly brought to you by SAYWHAT and supported by the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. My name is Miss Jones, and I am your debate mistress. Joining me today on stage are 4 prestigious universities. Teams, please make yourselves known, starting from podium 1 all the way to podium 4.
I'm Pato Tanganyika from Women's University.
I'm Michelle Gurure from Women's University in Africa.
Hello, I'm Metembe Mtimkulu from the University of Zimbabwe.
Hi, Kimberly Marima from UZ.
Chanasa Magwaza from Manicaland State.
I'm Nathan Dlovu from Manicaland State University of Applied Sciences.
Light Banda from Marondera University.
Tendai Sairai from Marondera University.
Now that you're well acquainted, welcome aboard. Let the games begin. This debate will follow the British parliamentary style. The rules are, each participant will be given exactly 4 minutes to state their case. Points of information are allowed. However, if your POI has been rejected, you have to wait for exactly 30 seconds before requesting for a second opportunity. With that being said, the motion reads. This House regrets the default classification of women as a vulnerable sector in policy frameworks on gender and conflict. This House regrets the default classification of women as a vulnerable sector in international policy framework on gender and conflict. The motion has been stated. Prime Minister, the ball is now in your court.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The motion reads, this House regrets default classification of women as a vulnerable sector in intervened policy framework and gender conflicts. It is a problem. Why? Because it is a problematic and counterproductive. Yes, women do face risk and challenges in conflict situation. Framing these only as vulnerable perpetrators harmful gender stereotypes. This perpetuate them and in a decrease in power and underrepresentation. This approach doesn't recognize and diverse roles that even also play in conflict. It denies their capacity of self-determination and leadership reinforcement narrative. And also, when women are termed as vulnerable, which is usually equated with weaknesses, this leads to authority questioning. This will lead to more males undermining women. For example, even in workplaces, where we are saying if women are termed as vulnerable, even if the woman is a boss, she won't be respected because they are termed rejected. It also overshadows the strength of women. For example, we're talking about women, how they can manage even the budget of a small amount that is brought forward by the men at the house. Women can manage that small amount to divide it from clothes, school, and even food. So why not give the women an opportunity by not looking at the issues that they are vulnerable? Yes, we agree that women are in the spotlight of abuse, like sex abuse or even harassment. But then that does not stop us from rejecting the fact that classification of women as vulnerable, as a vulnerable sector should be dealt with, declined. We should also look at the fact that when deemed of vulnerable, this reduces the discussing of important information or even important issues between men and women, because men will be afraid to be in light of abusing women. Men would engage in women in a dynamic conversation, ignoring the important conversation that they should have as men and women, because they are afraid that they will leave they're afraid that they will
information
decline. They're afraid that they might harass the women in a bid to have a normal conversation. This will leave women out of important dynamic conversation and decisions. We also look at the fact that women, these are also deemed
just one.
Okay.
Does this kind of classification of women as vulnerable exist outside international frameworks?
Yes, it does. Okay, I'll proceed. As women, the classification of women as a vulnerable sector in the Intervened Policy Fundament on Gender and Conflicts it also deems women as weak and as people that tend to use vulnerability and weakness as one thing. And also, we cannot ignore the fact that this will lead to more males undermining women, and as well as we are deemed, we also undermine the strength and also undermine the strength and the ability that women have when it comes to solving issues, be it in a community or even in a political setup.
That was the Prime Minister stating her case. Up next, Leader of Opposition, please take center stage.
Chair, women have been through it all. We say that it would be a denial of justice to actually ignore this kind of problem. I ask an important POI from Opening Opposition to say, does this kind of classification exist outside international framework? They concede to this. What that means is to say that if this classification continues to exist outside this, all of the problems that they talk about in terms of stereotypes continue to exist and perpetuate themselves within society. We think that they're a unique burden to show us why particularly is this a problem when it's in international frameworks and not necessarily within like the greater part of the society. We think that they miss that. But moreover, we want you to understand that vulnerability here is not synonymous to inferiority. That is, vulnerability is an understanding that despite being equal, you're actually more susceptible to harm. We think that we hate the squirreled definition of the motion. They lose on that. But moreover, notice the context within this debate that they also acknowledge that women and men are generally disproportionately affected by conflict. We are going to show you why it's important for us to emphasize this within international frameworks. Number of arguments here in justification. The first is that this classification allows for attention on issues on women, particularly within a global stage. That is to say that we recognize that women are a key population that is so help needing, and from that we think that we garner some form of attention. Why do we have this kind of unique attention from our side? We say that when you recognize it in international, especially international frameworks such as the Maputo Protocol, you make change that is binding. That is to say that everyone has to commit to that kind of change. You do not have an option whether you buy into feminism or not. We think that kind of change in and of itself is something that has been lacking for so long. We value that. But moreover, you say that you allow for also the movement to have like targeted support and financial resources insofar as you put this within an international scale that has some form of resources. We say that the feminist movement has been failing to address unique challenges because a lack of underfunding. But we think that there is also a principle to be made here to say that to not do so, that is to not acknowledge this within international frameworks, is unjust. There are two issues here in sophistication. Firstly, we say that it constitutes a form of harm denial, or rather victim blaming in this particular instance. When you deny the kind of atrocities and the harm and how damning your actions are, particularly to women, we say that we regret that. But secondly, you also cannot deny women of a space within international frameworks, because the nature of oppression in and of itself is that it takes opportunities and platforms away from you. The way in which you see this is that women are not represented in parliaments, blah, 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 blah. The end impact here is to say that the only way in which we can compensate for this kind of lack of platforms is to give a proportionate measure, and this one is to say that you put them in international platforms. We value that kind of a principle. You ought to buy into that. We also think that this form of classification catalyzes change. There are two things here in sophistication. That is to say that because there's a broader framework such as the Maputo Protocol in this particular instance, individual countries can then make commitments in and of themselves to actually help the movement. We think that there's often a follow-up on these commitments, and we say that we value that. But secondly, we think that there's a solidarity in international spaces with issues to do with women. We think that solidarity is so much important, for one, like the pooling of resources, and also in terms of pooling of ideas that actually solve the problem. I think their biggest charge from their side is to say that there are some women who are well off, who can be able to cater for their families, blah, 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 blah. Then good for them. We don't think that you are forced to actually be empowered. We can just empower the people who are actually harmed. We say that when we are designing these frameworks, we are targeted at particularly vulnerable women. And so the default classification says that women are all harmed, and then we have to solve those particular problems. We are incredibly proud to oppose.
That was the leader of opposition, proud to oppose. Up next, we have the Deputy Prime Minister.
As the motion reads, this House rejects the default classification of women as vulnerable sector in international policy frameworks on gender conflict. First of all, let's talk about how women have been classified as primordial, vulnerable individuals who are incapable of taking action of their own problems. This is what vulnerability is trying to imply within this sector, within this context, whereby we see women through classifying women as vulnerable individuals. Not only, yes, we cannot mix it with inferiority, but through just classifying them as giving them the term vulnerable makes them passive participators in the empowerment process of each and every thing that takes place. According to the Maputo Protocol, it also has one principle which focuses on women empowerment. But if we see, by classifying them as vulnerable, this will make women less participant or just passively participant, knowing that yes, we are vulnerable individuals. That means we will just do little things, not much, because we are vulnerable. What much change can we bring to society? Also, by actually classifying women as vulnerable, also classifying women as vulnerable, it actually makes the lack of agency quite to appear within the process of empowering them. Classifying women as vulnerable denies their agency and resilience and capacity to act as change makers. As we come back to change makers, women have now also been, by women being part of the, not by women being classified as vulnerable, this denies them their agency and resilience and capabilities, whereby we see that some women will not participate because they will not be acknowledged of their resilience by being termed vulnerable, which will actually self-introspect which will lead for them to self-introspect themselves and just hold them as less valuable individuals within societies. Also, oversimplifying women as being vulnerable, it doesn't do justice to some women who have taken part within certain sectors of society. It can be political or social or even economics, whereby we see in a social setting.
POI?
No, thank you. We can see within society, oversimplifying women as vulnerable. We actually ignore how they have participated within their family in taking charge. As we all know, in Shona, we use a term code, something like that. That goes under saying that women take charge of the house, meaning that since women take charge of the house, this inclines them that they have some power within society. and also influence over their families. Moving on. By considering women as vulnerable individuals, by classifying women as being vulnerable individuals, it also decreases power. It also decreases their power capability. It also decreases or creates power inequality, whereby we see the power dynamics will be shifted, whereby men will be now taking charge, saying that women are obviously termed as vulnerable individuals who can't do anything. With that term, we actually bring a certain mindset to men, not only to women, but to men as well. We just classify women as being incapable, doing certain things because they're termed vulnerable individuals, which will make them less involved within the process of trying to help them or empowering them. Also, moving on, you can also address how, but this doesn't mean my time is up. Thank you.
That was the Deputy Prime Minister representing the opening government. Up next, we have the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Please take center stage.
Panel, feminism is not where it wants to be as a movement in terms of achieving gender equality and solving all the injustices that women face. So what do we then say? We say that the starting point is to say that each and every woman is vulnerable before we even look at your problems, because we value that type of unique attention. So what do we then get from the opening government, right? The opening government comes here to tell us that this perpetuates stereotypes. We tell you that the idea that women are vulnerable already exists in our society, and it's going to take us a very long time for us to change that mindset. So why don't we then make the best of what we can get under that narrative, right? So what do we then say to you, panel? We say that we would rather try to get many advantages or many benefits from being viewed as vulnerable as women in these international platforms. Secondly, what do they tell us, panel? They come and tell us about women who have made it in this world because they can cater for themselves, and how it is very unfair for us to then classify each and every woman as vulnerable. We tell you that that is just an example of the minorities. It's not each and every woman who has made it, but that's just few women who have made it because of the patriarchal system that makes is in dominance, right? So what do we then come to tell you, panel, right? We tell you that undermining women's capacity to change system is what they said. But then we want to take a realistic part and say that feminism has, to say that patriarchy has been working for so long and women have been dominated for so long. Therefore, their arguments to say that if we start empowering women right now, men in the future are going to be oppressed is something that we don't buy into as the side opposition. Because why? Women have been suffering for a very long time and we're still trying to achieve gender equality. So tell me, which kind of future, how many years are we going to get there? Because we're still struggling 100 years after this whole oppression started. So what do we then come and tell you, panel? We tell you that classifying women as as vulnerable then allows us to then spark conversations in these international platforms. What do we then come and tell you, right, panel? We tell you that in these platforms we give women a spotlight to talk about their issues. What does this then do, panel? It helps us to tell stories. It helps women to share stories and actually inspire each other. And we tell you that, panel, since we are not yet where we are going to keep on pushing for the spotlight when it comes to women's issues, when it comes to the injustices that women face. And we value that spotlight because we want to advance our movement, we want to advance the feminist movement. Therefore, we do not mind classifying each and every woman, because that is to say that we understand that some of these women might be empowered, but we don't know what might happen. So in that instance, while we're still trying to come up with solutions, it is better for us to classify women as vulnerable. What have we told you as the side opposition panel? We have told you that 1, we get unique attention, 2, we catalyze change, and 3, we call for discourse. Now, why are arguments important in today's debate? We tell you that, panel, already in society, women are discriminated and they are vulnerable. So, we are going to make the best of this. What do we then come and tell you? Which is this default classification allows us to address these issues and get special attention and tell stories, because this is what we are vying for in our side of the house. So, panel, we then value this default classification.
That was the Deputy Leader of Opposition representing the opening opposition. And now we move on to the Member of Government. Please take center stage.
Panel, in the first half, we've seen the opening government who have come here and emphasized on the fact that the default or automatic classification of women as a vulnerable sector in international policy frameworks on gender and conflict brings about a lot of problems. They did mention stuff about it perpetuates a narrative of victimization and powerlessness, where we are saying that the women are now being taken as individuals that are totally powerless and are totally innocent and are totally vulnerable, right? And this overlooks the agency, the resilience, and the diverse experiences of women in conflict-affected settings, right? And we also saw the opposition, which came to say that it perpetuates, right? They say that it perpetuates stereotypes, and yet it's actually an issue of saying that it actually reinforces. They did mention that stereotypes have always been there, and that is actually very true. We support that, but we are saying that when we are now classifying women as totally vulnerable and is automatically or defaultly vulnerable, then this reinforces those stereotypes, and it hinders the efforts to address the root causes of gender-based vulnerabilities. And furthermore, it can overshadow the active roles that women play in peace building, conflict resolution, and community resilience, undermining their contributions, right? But I want you to also take note of this, panel. Apart from men just taking advantage of the fact that women are vulnerable, women themselves can take advantage of the fact that they're being called vulnerable, right? So now, what do we as the opposition, what do we as the side government come to tell you? We come to tell you that we have cases of women that are actually not as powerless as we are trying to portray them, right? We are now saying that automatically women are just vulnerable beings who have been facing a lot. But then when we are doing this, are we not going back to the same problem that we initially have denied? The more that we focus on attention that they're now giving, they're saying that they want the spotlight, and they're getting the spotlight because we have a lot of organizations, we have a lot of non-governmental organizations even, that are now catering to the women, that are now trying to empower these women that are vulnerable, right? But we are saying that the more focus and attention they are now given as a gender is now sidelining all other sectors. For example, the males. And this is resulting in the stifling of the men's voices, which is the exact problem that we are trying to run away from. Because in the first place, the women were the ones that were being stifled. We were not hearing their voices. And now we are saying we want to give them the entire spotlight to the extent that now the men are being affected, right? And this is causing the very same problem that we are actually running away from, that we are trying to fix. For example, now we have shows like Men Don't Cry, and we have a lot of organizations that are trying to protect the women, but we only have a few organizations that are now just coming out because they're now seeing that this whole issue of trying to classify women as super vulnerable is causing like more harm than good. And because of that, we also have instances like, for example, we now have issues that are coming out in the open of women who are actually pedophiles, women who are actually taking advantage of men behind the scenes, but the men are not not able to come out in the open because automatically we are saying that the women are vulnerable. So now we have an issue where we are causing the same problem that we were running away from, where we were saying we are trying to create a 50-50 environment, but the attention that we are giving to these women is cause for us to regret because now it's now sort of like over attention, or it's sort of like the level of vulnerability that we are giving them is now becoming a problem, right? Because now we are now affecting the other gender. It's now no longer an issue of 50-50 because men are now feeling sidelined. Men are actually having mental health issues because their issues are not able to come out in the open. They are not able to talk about the problems that they're facing because the one who is in the spotlight stands are the women.
That was the member of government. Up next, we leave the floor open for the member of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are saying that by virtue of women's gender, they are considered vulnerable. What does this mean, ladies and gentlemen? It means that women are more susceptible to violence, be it sexual, economic, or political. According to UNESCO, 1 in every 3 women have experienced physical abuse at some point. However, we are saying that if you cannot beat the assertion that women are considered as vulnerable, we might as well join it and actually harness it in our own favor. The government has said that rejecting classification of women as vulnerable encourages less participation. In contrast to that, I'm saying that if we classify women as default vulnerable, we are saying that we're actually encouraging them to take actions, be it in political implications, by making new policies that can actually address their issues. We are also saying that considering women as vulnerable, we can make policies such as the one which was made in Rwanda, where 30% of parliamentary seats are occupied by women. What does this mean, ladies and gentlemen? It means that we are encouraging a girl out there who is being considered vulnerable that no, we can actually do this. I can actually be someone. Ladies and gentlemen, the government has also stated that considering women as vulnerable, we are sidelining men. There is no longer a 50% chance of participation between men and women. Ladies and gentlemen, have we achieved our main goal of actually having women having equal opportunities in terms of political, social, and economic areas? No. That is why we are still perpetuating various strategies to make sure that women are recognized. We also say that by virtue of their gender, women have inherent disadvantages. What am I saying, ladies and gentlemen? We are saying that in terms of the working environment, women have to be given, for example, more leave days because they have childbirth, which men do not have. We are not saying that we are giving women more opportunities than men, as stated by the government. But what we are saying is that we're making rejected. What we're saying is that we're making the environment more convenient for women to work in. Ladies and gentlemen, we are saying that the classification of women as vulnerable is actually important in the division of labor. What are we saying, ladies and gentlemen? The work which is considered masculine is actually should be done by the males. Since we are saying that women are weak, this enables women to do the lesser masculine requiring jobs so that they can actually have time for other activities. Ladies and gentlemen, we are saying that international policies will cater for everyone, including women, so that their voice can actually be heard, so that they can make policies in terms of international framework. For example, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking of the Maputo Protocol, where these regulations were actually made in support of women. So I say that women being viewed as weak, as vulnerable, does not mean that they are weak. It simply means that they are more susceptible to issues concerning sexual harassment, economic, and political. We are not denying the fact that they shouldn't be classified as weak, but we're actually saying let's embrace it in our best interest as women. Thank you.
That was the member of opposition. Up next, we have the government whip.
Panel, standing in front of you, none other than the government whip, to address the issues to do with the default, with the government regretting the default classification of women as a vulnerable sector in international policy frameworks on government and conflict. Yes, I want to thank the opening government for clearing up and making a good highway for us to drive through. And they have said it correctly, and their view was so strong in that they say that the default class, they regret the default classification of the women as a vulnerable sector in international policy frameworks on gender and conflict. In that they said that the women, if they are classified with this default classification, they end up going to be manipulated by men due to men thinking that they are more superior and they can be abused due to that default classification. That was a wonderful view from the opening government, and I thank you for that. But we also provide an extension to this, in that we have also our view, which is just slightly different, but on the same page with you, that we regret also the default classification of women as a vulnerable sector in international policy framework on gender and conflict. Because there is a risk of overlooking the active participation of women in gender violence and in conflict when we will be resolving these conflicts. And also, we are saying that the default classification has hindered the development of more inclusive and effective policies and interventions that fully recognize and leverage the agents and contributions of women in conflict-affected contexts. Furthermore, the default decline said the default classification of women as a vulnerable sector can reinforce a narrow and understanding on gender dynamics in conflict, potentially overshadowing the specific needs and experience of them
POI?
Of men and non-binary individuals and other marginalized groups. For example, men are suffering from drastic mental health illness problems, but do not have what it takes to. They do not have enough support from the policies that have been made. So, from us, for instance, if a man is involved in a fight, it is difficult for them to report because they are deemed to be strong, and hence the default classification of women as vulnerable will result in them in a biased judgment in favor of the women. So we are saying that because of this, we regret the default classification of women as vulnerable. And with this, we want to say also that men can actually be raped, but since women are already classified as vulnerable, most judgments in conflict situations are done in the favor of women. Thank you.
The government whip has stated its case, and now we leave the floor open for the opposition whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we stand firmly with the notion that we do not regret declassification of women as a vulnerable sector. The other side talked about women as powerless, but we really were expecting them to explain further in terms of what are we talking about when we are saying powerless. In what terms are we saying they are powerless? They also talked about men's mental and classification. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to know that we are talking about women, not men. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with my previous speakers, I'm going to classify women as vulnerable in the following sectors: social sectors, religious sectors, political sectors, systemic, as well as physical. Ladies and gentlemen, we know from the Bible, for all those who are Christians, we have very few women who wrote the Bible, the verses. We also have women, like example, we have Jesus feeding so many number of people, but the recorded number were men, and we had no problem with that. Ladies and gentlemen, rejected. Political, we look at the political issues. Ladies and gentlemen, recognizing women as vulnerable, we are able to formulate frameworks that will be able to help them. For example, we have the 60 quota from the government of Zimbabwe, whereby we reserve 60 seats for women, thereby recognizing that they are weak and they need to be given some chances. Ladies and gentlemen, we look at social issues like cultural values. We know that from long ago, women used to do gathering and men used to do hunting. This by itself means that we are classifying women as vulnerable, and we are able to put them in areas where they are more effective. Ladies and gentlemen, we look at it physically, like my previous speaker said. We know that in terms of muscles, women are weak. So by recognizing that they are vulnerable in terms of their physical abilities, we are able to channel and manage resources. For example, we want to do heavy work, rejected. We want to, ladies and gentlemen, continuing from where I was, we can also, like GBV, we can formulate frameworks that will be able to support women because we recognize them as vulnerable. We have yes?
You've mentioned that we would create frameworks that would support women. My question is, doesn't that develop a dependent syndrome for women? Like they would depend on what you're going to provide for them.
I will answer that. Ladies and gentlemen, the dependent syndrome was already said by the supporting government. We were really expecting them to explain further what they mean by dependent syndrome, but actually they did not clarify what they mean by dependent syndrome. Classifying women as vulnerable, ladies and gentlemen, we are able to protect and safeguarding them. Classification of women as vulnerable can lead to increased protection and support, such as gender-based violence frameworks, like I have already said. Recognizing systemic disadvantages as we take women as invulnerable, we are able to stop violence.
And that was our final speaker for this debate. We'll now leave this time to the judges to deliberate. And as they do, podium 1, hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm all right.
You sure?
Yeah.
How are you feeling about this round?
It was quite tense.
Quite tense. Why?
Yeah. It's a sensitive topic, talking about how women are vulnerable. Why women are vulnerable and why one not consider them as not being vulnerable.
Okay, all right. There's a question on gender equity versus gender equality. What's your take?
I think equity is quite useful in contributing to equality because equity means uplifting someone, empowering them. So I know that within society, women have already been at a disadvantage due to certain factors they have. So equity will actually uplift them and make them equal to men.
I understand. I hear you. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, I'm okay, I guess.
How are you feeling about this debate?
Well, I'm anxious.
Anxious.
And emotional as well.
Emotional. Why?
Well, this is a very sensitive topic, as my partner has said, and I'm a woman.
Okay.
So, talking about the vulnerability of women, I feel offended already because I'm a woman.
Okay.
I feel like I'm not justified enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. I hear you. Do you feel like there's more that can be done when it comes to women empowerment?
Yeah, I believe there is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Podium 2. Hello.
Hello, hi.
I'm well, thanks, from the University of Zimbabwe. All right. What are you studying?
I'm studying law.
Law. Okay. So this is your field.
Not necessarily. I think, contrary to popular belief, debate is very different from law because the nature of the arguments that you make in law, they are legal arguments, whereas in debate, they are logical arguments. So it's quite different.
Okay. Okay. And ma'am, what are you studying?
I'm studying industrial sociology.
Industrial sociology. Okay. Okay. How is it related to debate, or you're just passionate about it?
I think when we were talking about industrial sociology, it's basically studying how people relate to each other in industries. So I think it does, to some point, contribute to debate, because we also talk about issues like feminism as theories that affect how women are then included in the industrial system. We also talk about issues like labor laws. So it's pegged, and I think, yeah.
Okay, so you are in your field, you're in your element, as I can see. Our judges are now ready. We'll give them the floor to give us their final verdict.
Okay, thank you so much to all 4 teams for that wonderful debate. What I'll do first is to give the rankings. Unanimously, we gave first to opening opposition, we gave second to opening government, we gave third to closing government, and we gave fourth to closing opposition. Firstly, on the team that gets first, I think firstly they're the only team that really delves into what the international policy framework looks like. No one else in that debate does really enough, especially from opening government. I think that was your duty to try and characterize what international policy frameworks look like, what they talk about, and why necessarily it is the characterization of women as vulnerable when it comes to those policy frameworks is something that we ought to care about as the panel, right? The reason why we don't penalize OG in this debate for not doing that is because even the teams in closing as they come, right, the attention is not necessarily particular on what international policy frameworks look like and what that characterization of women as vulnerable will essentially look like, which is why most of the arguments really move into what the characterization of women as vulnerable in society looks like. Why is it harmful, or why is it necessarily not harmful, right? Arguments from OO that we don't think a lot of people engage with. Firstly, they say, we think that vulnerability in itself is not synonymous with inferiority, right? Intuitively, all 3 teams make that same assumption. There's like a little bit of nuance as to what really is the difference between vulnerability and inferiority, right? Most of your arguments move into the complexity, the conclusions of, in general, it means, therefore, synonymously, women become more inferior in societies, right? So we thought that it didn't really speak into. But also a lot of arguments, they say, 1, you make change that is binding. 2, there's harm denial, right? You therefore deny the atrocities of women as being all these things that you recharacterize in your speech in CO, right? Because I think that's how you try to set yourselves apart from your opening, right? So we don't think you do necessarily enough to show that beyond just characterizing women as being more susceptible to violence and abuse in general, right? Most of the conclusions that you make in your speeches lead us to exactly the same point where opening opposition starts, right? And also the response speech, you spend a lot of time bringing in new material in that debate, and no one else has the chance to engage on that new material, but also we don't think it's necessarily responsive. For example, when you talk about the Bible and what women have represented in other sectors in general, we thought those were beautiful arguments. We just think they come very late in the debate and could have potentially been prioritized in member speech, right? Let's look at why you guys rank the way that you do rank. We think that also it's very difficult for you to differentiate yourselves from your opening, right? We think that the unique extension we get from your side is that you create loopholes where men are overshadowed or other people, other vulnerable sectors are not seen as therefore being very important. Firstly, we thought that was very contentious in the debate because I think all three teams generally agree that women are the most vulnerable people in society. So when you come in extension, say, well, there are other people that are also equally vulnerable, we don't think that necessarily addresses the idea of whether that characterization of women as vulnerable in international policy frameworks is one that we ought not to care about. So you see why your extension, therefore, can't rank above the team that is in your opening, right? And also necessarily on the clash that you get directly from opening government when they say, well, you undermine women, it means that it's more counterproductive and therefore you'd create some sort of power inequality that exists in society. So we thought because of all those things, they rank first, they come in second, you rank third, and unfortunately, they rank fourth. Come for personal feedback during lunch and all the best in your next rounds.
And that brings us to the end of this debate. Thank you so much to our judges and well done to the participants. This is the Speak and Solve Initiative, and I am Ms. Jones. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.